G2A have been extremely sneaky with the press. Cyberpunk has a rather staggering statistic. AMD are bringing the heat to PC gaming and far, far more. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Roundup, our Tuesday and Friday show in which we bring you a curated slice of the gaming news. This week, coming to you from Mallorca, because holidays may happen, but the show must go on. So, first up, updates to the G2A situation, and honestly, one of the most ill-advised PR moves that I've seen in quite some time. The heated conversation that started last week between G2A and No More Robots' Mike Rose has continued. G2A responded to Mike's tweets amidst other concerns in both a blog post and a rather hilarious tweet where they essentially admitted that yes, they are selling grey market fraudulent keys. Yeah, they said that if they went away, the problem would still exist. So yes, if they aren't there to facilitate the fraud will still happen. What an airtight argument. Their blog post opens with this. Let's lay all cards on the table. We will pay developers 10 times the money lost to chargebacks after their illegally obtained keys were sold on G2A. Now, the idea is simple in their blog post. Developers just need to provide evidence that such a thing happened on their stores. They say they will pay for an independent audit of developer stores and their own for the first 3, and that everyone after that, they will do 50-50 between them and the developer. And if fraud is found to have happened, they say they will make up for it, being transparent throughout the process. Now, while this may be a bit of a bluff, G2A are certainly not pulling any punches with their public blog post, but as for my personal read, well, I think they're saying this for good PR, knowing the devs almost certainly will not touch them. Now, moving on, they did provide a ton of statistics, saying that since Descender's full launch in May, they've only sold 5 keys, with 226 being sold during its early access period. Based on the estimations of Descender's sales from Steam Spy data, they say they've handled a lot less than 1% of Descender's sales units. They then say they can't check every key for legitimacy, but they know that they're not doing much wrong, and that it is in their best interests for keys sold on the site to be legitimate so they will not get revoked, and they've got systems in place like, say, seller feedback and the money back guarantee for free, unlike the old G2A Shield, which they admit was a mistake. But of course, they only say the G2A Shield was a mistake now that they've been called on it, so much like the rest of G2A's communications, it does ring pretty hollow. And on those Descenders numbers, well, Mike Rose did say that he has emails and things like that go against what G2A has said, so we'll need to see if he releases them. Now, they then say that keys obtained through credit card fraud are not the main method of making money, and that if it were true, they'd completely agree with their detractors. They say it's not easy to commit credit card fraud, and it's even harder to launder money through games because keys are often not available in bulk. Indie keys can be, but their site, according to them, does not ship that many. They estimate that it would take months to sell $5,000 of indie game keys on their site. So, overall, the blog post is G2A defending themselves using whatever metrics they have to hand. Honestly, there's a significant amount to go into on that topic later, once we have more information, but for now, G2A have said that they will have a solution to the issue that developers are taking with their platform in a few days. So, once we've heard about that and the dust settles, expect some sort of deep dive in G2A's history and the business practices surrounding it. So sure, that's their statement, but it's not the end of their actions. The real story for me here is the length to which G2A have went to try to salvage their PR, and this story really is absurd. G2A PR contacted members of the press, saying that they are attempting to improve their brand awareness and public image amongst indies, and that the majority of the public does not understand their business model. So far, a bit of an odd email, right? But what comes next is what's got G2A in hot water. Here's the quote. "We have written an unbiased article about how selling stolen keys on gaming marketplaces is pretty much impossible." Yes, G2A have written an article about themselves and they're claiming that it's unbiased. And remember, they attached that to that mail in the same time that they said that their express goal is to improve their brand awareness and their public image. But it gets far worse though, because they say this: "And we want you to publish it on your website without being marked as sponsored or as associated with G2A." And that line was written in bold, but amazingly it gets worse, with them saying that if an outlet is interested, they are to respond with pricing details for the post. So yes, G2A wanted to pay for an article to be published without disclosure. I say wanted because they then said this: "These emails were sent out by our employee without authorization, for which we apologize to Indie Games Plus and the 9 other media outlets he sent this proposal to. He will face strict consequences, as this is absolutely acceptable." Now here's the thing, are we to believe that follow-up statement? It's kind of hard to say. This was clearly approved by somebody at G2A. After all, it did come with a promise of an already written article, and there clearly was ad budget, put to it. It seems like this was a part of their planned marketing push, although to be honest, it's so incredibly stupid that I do find it hard to believe that it's much more than just a few members of a department that have collectively lost their minds. Ultimately, it is impossible to tell how much this reflects the actual intended tactics of G2A without fully knowing how far up the chain of command this had to go for approval. Yes, this could have been their intent, but it also could have been a few employees who did something really stupid. It's hard to know without knowing their internal approval processes, because it's a company of 700 employees. That means something could slip through the cracks, but equally, it also does mean that they will need approval processes for things like this, especially when ad budget is going to be assigned to something. But still, what this essentially is an attempt to bribe multiple outlets to not disclose a sponsorship. This was done in G2A's name by G2A, and their response seems like a pretty convenient get-out-of-jail-free card. So right now, that's mostly it. It's a back and forth between some indie devs and publishers and G2A, with most media siding with the indies. Mike Rose, of course, did snap back at the article, debunking some of the points, saying he can disprove them with emails that he may release, and going on to start a petition that's gained about 3,500 signatures, but as with almost all things in change.org, I suspect it'll be rather pointless. As for the petition's contents, well, G2A basically said that indies are only 8% of their sales, so Mike argued that they won't miss that 8% with his petition asking G2A to stop selling indie titles, but to be fair, that is a pretty absurd thing to ask a storefront to do. Ultimately, it's a messy situation that G2A have, got in. I think they're rightly reviled by developers and responsible consumers, especially for the likes of the absurd stuff they tried to pull with G2A Shield back in the day. But until G2A unveil their plan, there's really not much of a conclusion that we can come to. Ultimately, this all happened because their ad spend on Google happened to land in the sights of Mike Rose, rather than them doing anything particularly new and dastardly. So we'll just have to wait for the next development. But next up though, another publisher and store debate. So in the last roundup, we discussed how TinyBuild were supposedly refusing to update games on GOG, with the reason provided by a community manager being that it promotes piracy. But as it turns out, this is far from the official stance. TinyBuild's CEO made a post to the GOG subreddit to clear the air. He said that none of the company reps' views actually matched up with what the company thinks. He said that they did not train their community managers on the topic and that that's what caused the issue. He went on to praise GOG as a really good partner and reiterated that they just missed in getting their CMs on the same page with the DRM-free versions of their games. Now, he said that they do take the blame openly and that they will brief their team on what their company position is and how to sort this stuff out in the future. Now, he did also promise that they will update every build where possible and that deluxe editions of Party Hard are coming up. He later added that there's a genuine reason for those builds not being up quickly, and that's because of team sizes and how their games often do have platform dependencies like Steamworks for things like user profiles and for storage, meaning that those systems need to be replaced or maybe custom made for the DRM-free version of their games, which is a time-consuming process that does take engineering time. Now, he said that this doesn't excuse missing DLCs or soundtracks though, and that they're figuring out a way to be more transparent as to which build of which game is on which store, which I basically take as meaning selling like different SKUs. Overall, though, it seems to have been an issue of miscommunication and things slipping through the cracks. The situation has been resolved in a solid way, and I can totally understand that things like this do, slip through the cracks, especially in indie dev and publishing, where it is just all about spinning plates for a living. However, the fact that it takes something like this to kick up for GOG builds to be updated, well, that is a little bit disheartening for those like myself who do want more DRM-free support in games across the board. Okay, next let's move on to China. So Tencent and others like NetEase and Perfect World are making moves to establish an age rating system in the country. They currently don't have an equivalent to the ESRB or PEGI, and that's that's potentially going to change. So currently games need to get a license from the government in order to be sold, and that means they've got to go through a pretty slow government approval process. But having existing standards and categories like an age rating system could speed that process up. But there is a downside though. It has been supported out of the gate by the state newspaper. So I think it's pretty likely we'll see meaty restrictions on content across the 4 categories that have been proposed, which are 6+, 12+, 16+, and 18+. Now, it could be that the existence of an 18+ standard means that Chinese gamers can get access to more adult content. It seems like, if you've got to bracket games as being every single age bracket, then that could sort of lead to some of the problems that have existed there with more violent content or things like that, which are totally okay for an 18+ audience. So that could be a good thing. However, given the Chinese government's history, I can't imagine it's going to reduce the overall levels of censorship. This is more likely intended to grease the wheels and to allow for government-approved games to get into the marketplace a bit more quickly so that China can be more competitive in the games industry, and I suppose to give the board a bit more time on 18+ games that have things like, say, incorrect values, or that maybe falsely promote history and culture. Yep, those are real reasons they've given in the past. This rating system has been proposed and supported, so once it goes through an expert committee of researchers, execs, and press, and all of that stuff, it could very well be implemented. We don't know any other details past that, so for Chinese gamers this could be a plus in terms of getting their games faster, but it could still be a negative in that they will have to deal with massive state censorship. Next up, let's talk about PC gaming though, because we do have exciting news. AMD have released their 3rd gen Ryzen CPUs on the Zen 2 architecture, and seemingly are dethroning Intel in terms of price to performance, seemingly within gaming. Now, without going into too much technical details, the new AMD CPUs are complete workhorses. Like, Ryzen itself was great, especially in multi-core, but it did lag behind Intel a bit in single-core performance, which is very important for games. So while these new processors are not a massive quantum leap in performance, Intel largely have had a monopoly on gaming performance, and they've been able to inflate their prices because of that. Well, now that AMD are providing really strong competition through a better value product, PC gaming will be in a more affordable, more competitive state once the companies start fighting each other harder in price point. Now, the same goes to a lesser degree in the GPU market, where the new Radeon RX 5700 and 5700 XT are actually competing quite closely, sort of trading blows with the NVIDIA RTX Super Series, causing both parties to drop prices to compete. Now, while neither of those ranges are massive leaps ahead in terms of performance for gaming applications, AMD's return to form will be fantastic for PC gamers, and that's all because of fair competition, where both of the companies are focusing on making the best value products they can. The original Ryzen launch was fantastic, but it was held back a little bit for gaming because of the lower single-core performance, even though they were still actually really good value parts. But with Zen 2, it really seems like that's no longer the case, and that's a great position for us to be in. Then last up, a little bit on Nintendo, who've talked about their ambitions for input methods. They're attempting to design a next-gen controller, one that will supposedly be an industry standard. The idea, according to Miyamoto, is to, quote, achieve an interface that surpasses the current controller, where what the player does is directly reflected on screen and the user can clearly feel the result. I'm wondering if that means haptics. It's kind of hard to conceptualize exactly what he's talking about here, but if it deviates too far from what gamers know and love, well, it's going to be a pretty darn hard sell to the industry. That said, I'm excited for anything that comes from this, but it was an answer to a shareholder question rather than a big public statement from Nintendo, so I doubt we'll see anything for the next few years. Now, in the same QA session, Nintendo also said that they're not actually lagging behind technologically in the gaming industry, meaning things like, say, online services like, maybe streaming, and then also things like, say, VR. They essentially said that they just don't talk about things until they have a product ready for market, one that actually fits their standards for experience and for cost, which gives the outward appearance that they're a bit slow off the mark. Miyamoto also said that cloud gaming is going to be widespread, but in true Nintendo fashion, that he does believe that there are games that are fun because they run locally, and I do happen to agree with him. Then as for subscription services, they also said that they do have Nintendo Switch Online, which, let's be real, is not that great, but does offer NES games for people who have signed up, and that they will further evaluate what value they can add to that sub moving forward. And then actually one final little thing, and that is that Cyberpunk 2077 has had 1/3 of pre-orders be on GOG, which is of course really quite big, because GOG is a part of the CD Projekt Red overall group, meaning that 100% of the money does go to them. And I think what really you see here is gamers do want the people who make the games to get most of the money from the games. And when you apply that over to the Epic situation, I think it really does show you. People don't actually, people are not striking back because they don't like 8812 and maybe they think developers are greedy. I don't really think that's what's happening. It's far more the exclusives. If Epic was parity with Steam, 8812, I think most people would see that as a really good thing. And when given the opportunity to support a developer financially through a storefront where they get 100% of the revenue, like with this situation with Cyberpunk, well, it's pretty obvious what consumers have done. Although, of course, a part of that is how masterfully CD Projekt Red have managed their public relations for that game. So, there you go. That is it for this slightly more, slightly more sunny episode of the Roundup. Of course, while it is a holiday, content will continue on the channel, so don't worry about that. Be sure to check back over the coming days for a lot more. Thank you very much for watching, and with that, I'll see you next time.